30 years ago, it wasn't quite an organization. It was a very small studio.
Competitions did help Zaha Hadid organization in becoming big.
We only became an organization at the end of the 90s. To get proper project for Zaha, it took her, at least 20 years.
If you could tell us what this parametricism means for you and how do you incorporate that into the projects here?
It started very kind of primitive and simplistic with young architects at university again, mostly, toying around with new animation tools, with tools which weren't meant for architects.
What were the major reasons that would lead to losing the project? Finally, what's one architectural project that you had dreamt of working on it but hadn't had the chance yet? Hello everyone, welcome back to Speaking Real Estate Podcast. Today I'm thrilled to welcome one of the most influential voices in contemporary architecture, Mr. Patrik Schumacher. As the principal of Zaha Hadid Architects, Patrik has been the forefront of redefining architectural innovation and urbanism for over 3 decades. He is the visionary behind Parametricism, a design philosophy that seamlessly integrates advanced computational tools and organic forms to create dynamic future-ready spaces. With a career marked by groundbreaking projects, thought-breaking publications, and a leadership in shaping the discourse of architecture, Patrik's work continues to inspire a generation of architects and designers worldwide. Join us as we today discover his journey, his philosophy, and his vision for future of architecture. Hi Patrik, how have you been?
I'm good, thank you.
Very glad to host you today and going to take back a lot of learnings today with this podcast that I'm having with you. So, you have been at Zaha Hadid Architects for a period of about 3 decades, and it is a tenure which is very rare and truly inspiring today. I want you to say what really made you join this association, this organization 3 decades back ago, and what inspired you to stay go for such a long period of time?
30 years ago, it wasn't quite an organization. It was a very small studio, close by to here. Zaha Hadid just founded the studio or got the space 2 years earlier. And before that, she was working from home or from school, where she did some competitions with tech students, and she didn't have any employees. So she started in 86, I joined 88. I was one of very few employees. So not much of an organization, but was like a family. But Zaha had made a name of herself with some major competition wins, and some spectacular drawings, no build works yet. And so she was a star on the scene with respect to student populations and the academic world and maybe the cultural world. And the very year I joined, the same time, there was the opening of the MoMA show in New York, deconstructivist architecture, and where she was one of 7 protagonists who all then became quite successful later on. And that show was a big stepping stone. And I joined her at the very moment when this show opened up, and I had met her before at the Tate Gallery, where they did an anticipatory symposium on that show. And I had known her before. I'd known her when I was a student in Stuttgart. I came to London to be a student here, and I was still a student when I joined her. But when I saw her speak, that added some additional kind of decision making, because I had some other options potentially. So I joined her.
Can you tell us about some of the early days why you were working with Zaha Hadid and some of the philosophies or things that she might have instilled in you, and you have carried forward those philosophies and learnings with you all throughout the career?
Well, it was quite hard work, late hours every day of the week, including weekends. And it was mostly competitions. And we didn't win any of them at the beginning, but it was a thrill because we would be able to publish our works or had exhibitions. And the first task was to do a big painting, and I was sent to Berlin and representing the company or the studio for an exhibition, contributing that work. The first The real job was actually was a direct commission for this Vitra fire station. And that was the first opportunity to work on something to be built. I was quite involved in it because it was also German speaking, as was in Germany actually. So I played a big role there. This was my first real project, but otherwise mostly competitions.
What were these competitions like? Could you tell more us about the competitions?
Yeah, there were, for instance, actually a lot of them were in Germany. Germany had a lot going on with respect to competitions in Berlin and Hamburg, mixed-use complexes, um, you know, urban schemes, etc. Also, the first major competition win in the early 90s was in Germany. It was in a city called Düsseldorf, a harbor redevelopment, a big multi-use complex on the waterfront. That was our first breakthrough, where we developed the project further, and at that point also then the firm could grow. The studio grew to about 20 people. Before, during the competition periods, there was always external or additional help. She had like 3 or 4 employees. And then ex-student of her would join us to help. But the breakthrough was, again, Germany, Düsseldorf. It didn't happen because the client, the big advertising agency, had kind of, during the process, sold. Then they tried to bring in somebody else, like Boston Consulting Group from the US. And in the end, they didn't decide to take the potential lease. So the project fell apart. And when we won another competition, still in the early 90s, for the Carl Opera House, that fell through after a year of work. So we got sometimes some stretch winning competition and get some stretch of development work. And in the end, there were political barriers and the funding was restored, etc. So there were serious setbacks. We kept going with the small building, like the fire station in Basel, or close to Basel, was in the end built. I think the opening was 92, 93, and it became an event in the world of architecture because Zaha Hadid, we were known with these beautiful drawings and innovative ideas, and this was a built work. And so we had a lot of friends and major architects show up for the opening, like Wolf Brixton Immerlau or Jacques Herzog, and quite a few others, but also Philip Johnson came, who was the curator of the Deconstructorist show and had been curating the International Style Exhibition at MoMA in 1931. So he was at the later stage of his career, but he was obviously a major figure still in the world of architecture. It was very, amazing for us that he made his way, age 90 plus or something, to this little village in Germany to appreciate our building. So we had this one success, but we had the rest of the 90s was more or less fun to do, interesting works to do, to impress colleagues and students with, competitions, lectures, exhibitions, but no build works.
During that time, if we are talking about 20-30 years ago, competitions did help the organization in becoming big and getting that recognition.
Yeah, later. I mean, again, we only became an organization at the end of the 90s. So I converted into a kind of limited company, a corporation. We were 2 directors, and we hadn't built anything and won anything, but at the end of the 90s, we did win 3 major works. Cincinnati Contemporary Arts Center, the MAXI, which is the National Museum of Contemporary Art and Architecture in Rome. That was the biggest win. And a science museum in Germany, Wolfsburg, where the Volkswagen headquarters are. So these 3 wins came within 1 year, and they were all realized in the end. I mean, they took very long. Each of them took, Cincinnati came first, but it was also several years, many years. Wolfsburg was over 10 years. Maxi was 20 years. But anyway, put on the map, we won these competitions, and Cincinnati also was recognized in the US, put her more on the map there, and she won the Pritzker Prize. I think roughly at the time of the finishing of the Cincinnati project in 2004. So that was then a breakthrough, and right at the moment when you had this massive, unsustainable in the end boom kicking off through, no unsustainable money printing and exuberance kind of real estate bubble. So, 2005, 6, 7, until the final meltdown in 2008. That's when we grew from, 30 people to 450 people. And that was kind of a roller coaster moment, driven by Dubai on the one hand, Dubai, Abu Dhabi in the Middle East, other Middle Eastern countries, but also China started, Guangzhou Opera House, and Europe. The European Union had, and they subsidized some of these countries, like Spain in particular. We had a project in basically every city of Spain. And so that kind of fantastic boom period was a thrilling period where we just expanded the firm recklessly. And I have to say this all to my credit, because I was the reckless one, and who we continuously hired all our students year by year, and ended up with 450 people going into this crisis. But we survived. I mean, that boom established us, and we were hanging in there.
With projects spread all across the globe, how does the organization keep up with the consistency and quality? How do you ensure seamless communication and collaboration, whether at different team members working across all different areas of the world?
Well, I mean, the early works, this was few, and we got a deal of time, so they came out very well. I was personally working on Maxi, made at least the early stages, several stages, going every week and looking at all the details. We had similarly Cincinnati and Wolfsburg. Then we had a Salerno terminal station, which also took over 10 years, maybe 15 years, 20 years. So they took too long, but we were very kind of quality control conscious and able, and we were learning. We were all kind of green and unexperienced, but we had enough time to learn. So that was good. Later on, we did run into some issues with the early works in China, the Guangzhou Opera House, because China construction wasn't so experienced. They run into managerial problems and economic problems with respect contractor going bankrupt, not because of our job, but because of the kind of meltdown in the Middle East. So we have quality issues there, and we had to also scale our ambition, the degree of complexity, more maturely to the capabilities of the different regions. And that remains a challenge. But we are much more experienced now, and we carefully involved with finding contractors, querying contractors, the subcontractors, and paying a lot of attention, with respect to making mock-ups and selecting contractors. So I think we're doing reasonably well, and we're a large team, and we always have local people. I mean, students from these different areas coming here, working here, and speaking the language, knowing that can interface well with the local partners and contractors. So I'm reasonably confident.
I want to move to the point where now you're a principal at Zaha Hadid Architect, and you have been with the firm during various transformative phases, such as when you had faced a difficulty during the 2008-9 as well. I want you to say your guiding vision for the firm And how do you keep up the balance with the originality of the Zaha Hadid, but also trying to enter new boundaries as well?
Well, I mean, Zaha was also always interested in doing something new, not every Monday morning. Yeah, like me said, you can't reinvent architecture every Monday morning. So there's a kind of continuity in development. The direction was set, but we're always looking for some new capabilities, new ideas, and that has continued. And the mechanisms which we built for that are, the one hand, all these competitions and doing many projects, many designs, but more importantly, collaborating with universities and teaching studios, and quite long-term, mature studios. So I'm teaching now since 1996 at the A here, with a post-professional course, 18 months, overlapping student generations. So we generate a kind of continuous culture of learning, with a lot of the students being hired into the company. That's been going on for since then, just now nearly 28 years. And we have ex-student on this studio in the board, in the group of directors, in the associate directors, associates, senior associates, all the way down to the layers. So we have that nice kind of connection, but also the research and development of new ideas and testing out new ideas, new tools. That's what we need these studios for. So we did 15 years of Vienna, which is a very special university where they had so-called master classes, meaning the students stayed with one team, Zaha and myself, for their whole career. So they come in first year and they do their diploma maybe 6 or 7 years later. So, and we have them every year. And so it's a mixed group, meaning the first years and the 5th years or 6th years that work together, form teams, and we can develop continuity, the skill sets, the ideas, the debates, the themes, and this was the second most important. And then we also did recurring studios at Yale, several studios at Harvard, Columbia University, this was always helpful to experiment with new ideas. And this second stage after this was then to do small pavilions. So we sometimes invited for, conferences and exhibitions and biennales, where we, and also collaborating with other universities, where we do kind of experimental buildings or small buildings like the Serpentine pavilions. So then we can scale up gradually into developing a theme, for instance, tensile structures. It's a complex theme, and how we treat with this, and having shell structures and the combination of shells and tensile structures. That was an innovation which we developed through the university research, etc., through pavilions, and then into larger buildings. Similarly, when it came to towers, we started relatively late. All our work was complex and horizontal for many years. We went into towers. Again, we did studios of tower research, internal research as well. So we did a kind of tower research group inside the company, and then when we're looking at developing exoskeletons and atria, for instance, a theme which we're trying to do, we developed this first at the university level with students. Then, because when you do a competition, you maybe get 5 weeks, 6 weeks. It's difficult. You usually have to rely on the repertoire you have developed, something you can be sure about, and you don't start something totally new. It's not possible. And because we were so embedded with so many universities, we have this advantage. And then we also now have built research teams, internal research teams, computation design teams, developing tools, but also themes, different themes. We have also an environmental engineering research team. We have corporate space building teams, agent-based simulation teams. We're doing also AI kind of research teams. At the moment, develop the capacity, and now we're also doing new tower research. So, as well as having PhD groups, teaching PhDs for some of the more ambitious, let's say, tool building. That is very important. Without that, we couldn't innovate. And you see that with other architects who don't have that, who maybe come out of school and as young firms innovate and then kind of keep repeating for the rest of their careers. And because they don't have these mechanisms, you can develop innovations in business. I believe that's nearly, I'm certain about that. But we are not relying on our business projects to do the research. We have other research arenas. And that's very rare in architecture, because most schools of architecture, particularly in the UK, there's a divorce between practice and teaching. Many others who do practice, they don't have such an innovative practice. Our advantage is we can develop these new ideas and then we can implement them. Either it takes a few years of building them up, trying out several years at the studio level and bring them into some competitions, into some experimental buildings, and then maybe 10 years later they're out there. But again, 10 years is not for you as a young person, it's a long time. For me, it isn't so long. And so, for instance, now we've been working on the Metaverse, also with studios, and now we actually founded a Metaverse. We're Metaverse designers and entrepreneurs. Again, something new. And again, it is supported by academic research or university-based research.
It's very impressive how the organization focuses so much on research and has so many ways of continuing that over such a long period of time. Another important and nice thing was that how this research and innovation is not dependent on the business coming into the organization, where you have found other ways of continuing the research independent of the business that the organization needs. I want to ask you this thing now. Zaha, the organization or any other organization at this scale has that capability to do these research and innovation. But if out there is a small new studio with just 4 or 5 people, and I believe there might be thousands and millions of such studios in the world today looking up to your organization. If you could say something how these studios should try to innovate in whatever manner possible in their capabilities.
Well, first thing I would say, this study period is where you had most energy and time. So to build up the scale and build up an ambition and do some research development, some experimentation at university, then when you come out, you have already something you want to try, perhaps. Of course, you have to also gear your research to something which has a degree of feasibility. But there could be another, what I see a lot with younger firms, that they still connect with university, so they come back early as teachers. That's possible in the UK, maybe not so possible in India or Europe, where you have old professors and the best you can do is being an assistant. And maybe they're a little bit dictatorial. But here, and also maybe Germany now, so the assistant even or the adjunct professors or teachers, tutors, they can develop their own themes, their own agendas, and then use the student body to develop it. They also then have personally more time to do competitions and connect this up. So to build something, I wouldn't say they don't necessarily go into major business commitment and contract commitments too early in their career. Because if you do that, then you get into the rut and you can't get out. And you have to also, because you don't catch the big fish. The big project sometimes has more leeway, more fees, more budget, particular cultural project, arts project. This is the spaces where one can use to innovate. So to be patient, I don't know about the Indian scene, but I've seen it a lot that, to get proper project for Zaha, it took her, at least 20 years. And I was there for 10 years. When she started as a kind of, with the same formula, being a tutor, working the students, working on competitions on the side, from her house, Teffer, all the way until we got the first major jobs. This was 20 years. So by the time she was nearly 50. When Eisenman founded his office, Peter Eisenman, he was 50. When Koolhaas got going, he was kind of in his 45 at least or something. So we need to be patient. It's very rare that you could kind of kick it off faster. If you want to kick your business off fast and early on, you can't. The ambitions have to be sort of more realistic, and that means equally probably less innovative. It's not that you couldn't sometimes innovate on an interior if you find a good client who is giving you some space. But that's what I feel. Patience, invest in the research, but with a view on a marketability and something which really could fly in the real world. And that's where I find the culture of contemporary universities. I mean, we have our own kind of inroad and self-determination in university. But what I see with respect to most studios in university, they are not geared to this eventual breakthrough and success. Because maybe they don't see it. Maybe they're disillusioned. In this particular, since the meltdown of 2008, I've observed that there's a kind of left-wing, anti-capitalist, highly overly critical and orientation towards marginal sides to social justice, small things. I mean, the whole atmosphere and attitude at universities, which I know all the elite universities nearly in the West, is absolutely antithetical to any success of any student.
Knowing that now a person needs to have a patience of about 10-20 years to actually create something, and it does take time to make something. To you coining the term parametricism and you defining that architectural theory as well. If you could tell us what this parametricism means for you and how do you incorporate that into the projects here?
So again, I mean, first of all, I coined the phrase in 2007, then I made it more public in 2008 at the Venice Biennale. But this was already 15 years after it started to happen. I mean, it started very kind of primitive and simplistic with young architects at university again, mostly, toying around with new animation tools, with tools which weren't meant for architects, like something which later became Maya. So different tools coming out of science simulations, but mostly out of the animation industry. Where you can model cloth and hair and flows and smoke and these were interesting tools to generate totally different architecture props. So toying around with the softwares and then getting started into algorithms, how to not just by hand kind of compose, but let it proliferate and form. That was the beginning of what later became known to be parametricism. This was using sheets and making projects not by dissecting spaces with walls or boxes, but by rippling a surface and shearing a surface, folding and splicing and making a single fluid surface, a bit more like kind of landscape on multiple levels. It was called folding in architecture. That was the beginning. I retrospectively say this is the beginning of parametricism, because what was interesting that this new way of doing architecture came with a lot of ideas and concepts, even about smooth transitions, for instance, between spaces. They became, a whole generation of young architects got into it, was excited about it, and we started to use it to sketch, to develop competitions. Then it became more and more applied to different types of buildings, more and more introducing technical questions. If you have this strange form, how can you make openings in that? How can you skin this? So you have tessellations, patterns on this. How would structure interface with this? How you could develop a structure. When structural engineering had the tools like finite element analysis and certain optimization tools, which could interface with this. So it took 15 years when we realized, oh, well, this is quite stable. This is cumulative. More and more people invest in this. This can actually work. And we can start to win some projects, smaller ones, later bigger ones. But it took a long time again. That was not only our thing. This was a whole generation of architects not well globally necessarily, but a lot in the US and in the UK. Particularly Columbia University was most advanced than the AA. Columbia University AA here were the main poles, but then spread out around other schools. UCL here, as well as came later Harvard, and later on, etc., Yale and so on. Took a while. And yeah, what is beautiful about it, it had brought together two things. On one hand, new tools and new capacities, but also an understanding of the new demands and requirements of architecture and the city, meaning something which is more adaptive, more complex. You had a larger solution space. It's the endless forms of nature to solve more complex problems, mixed use, different types of spaces, intervisible, interaware, connecting across levels, connecting into complex sites, not having a grid and a greenfield, but having different neighboring buildings and connecting with them. So you had to be more versatile and more adaptive. So these were the advantages of this. And then we also learned how to manufacture and fabricate and structure this with the new tools, robotic manufacturing, CNC production. So that developed. So the latest state. And so this paradigm has been going on for 30 years now also. And it has evolved into different stages and maturity processes. And the latest stage, tectonism, has evolved for the last 10 years with a lot of emphasis on engineering, logics. So it was a movement. The problem which happened to the discipline in the 2008-2009 meltdown was also the dynamic of that movement that dispersed, because there was not much work. The work seems exuberant. You seemed all kind of over optimistic up to that point. I mean, you had the European debt crisis, not only the meltdown in Dubai and so on, where all the projects stopped, but the European debt crisis, where all the European projects stopped. And I think it was disheartening, and the discipline turned anti-capitalist and turned away from this, and this infringed on this movement. It couldn't grow any further. We had done the breakthrough. We were recognized, so we were nearly the only larger firm left, and the other smaller firms who were hopeful didn't come through. I mean, there's also in studio from the time Foreign Office Architects, they kind of disappeared. Greg Lynn, his studio never took off. So Last Spiral, these are the protagonists who had studios, small projects, who didn't succeed, hadn't kind of broken through into a stage where they could no longer be kind of disappeared. They all disappeared. So that's why Parametricism then it was picked up by corporates to some extent. So it spreads more, and some of our students in China, like MAD, Mayan Song, etc., came on, or someone like Thomas Heatherwick picked up some of the ideas. So it is emerged there, and for instance, in Mumbai, the airport done by, I think, SOM is parametricism. But these big corporates, they have many different styles. They have no ideology, no direction. They do whatever. They have different, whatever maybe they can get away with, or accidentally. Some of the teams are for this orientation. Another team has another orientation. So this, in the end, there is made examples, or Fuchsas also is not genuinely part of that movement, but then he hired some of my ex-students and so on, and they won, for instance, Shenzhen Airport, and some of their jobs. It came through gradually in recent years, but as a big movement, it hasn't taken over. That is kind of the way I appraise this now, but it is definitely the style for the 21st century. Architecture was rational and appropriate and best practice response to the conditions of the 21st century, urbanism, urban development, architecture. And so I think it will eventually come through. And we also learn more and more how to realize this economically, compared to other styles. All the other styles are just retro styles and isn't 21st century. This is the only 21st century project. But you have a lot of established architectural firms who are quite happy to continue their old ways. They're designing buildings exactly the way you could have designed them 80 years ago or 100 years ago. That's most of what is being built in London, which is very conservative. China is more progressive. That you see much more parametricism, even with the big design institutes, or also Western firms going to this market transmute into this direction. And I also have a lot of hope for India. And here it's going to be, it's too mature, it's too conservative to pick up. But I think in the US, you had some chances. I think the Google headquarters by Hadid and Big are in the direction. I mean, what they've done there looks very similar to what I've studied at Harvard about the Google campus. So I'm optimistic that this will eventually come through. One more thing I see when you look at AI in architecture, or the use of AI by architects, and you Google it, you suddenly see, whereas in the real world, maybe parametricism was 5% of the work or 3%. In the world of AI, it shows the wishes, what young architects and students would like to design. It's kind of 80% parametrics. But it's harder. I mean, they maybe don't even have the skill to actually model that and think this through. But AI, it shows up, that's what they would like, and that's a good sign. Similar with Metaverse, the Metaverse architecture, which is usually younger architects, etc., and you don't have the constraints of heavy cost, control, client, uncertainty. So in the Metaverse, you also see parametricism flourishing. So with these indications of some territories where parametricism is growing, Metaverse and AI, it is dominant. It's the hegemonic style in these domains. And I've always been saying parametricism must be hegemonic within architecture, the global built environment, but also the other design disciplines. Interior design, product design, furniture design, fashion design, all of that should evolve into this direction, I believe. As similar to the way modernism was hegemonic or dominant, let's say, across the whole globe in 1950. Architecture meant modernism in India, of course, but also in Africa, the US, Europe, everywhere. It took a while. Started in Germany, 1920s, the 30s, England came on, and America slowly started only after 1930, through someone like Philip Johnson and the show at Bulma, etc. And then the war came, of course, and it only came through in the 50s everywhere. And so again, this took, we're now parametricism with 30 years in. Modernism kicked off massively 30 years after its first beginnings. So I'm hopeful.
I believe the change today at the pace it changes things is way too high. Like if a thing was adapting to certain kind of change 20 years ago, it took a period of 10 years to accept that change. Now it will happen in 5 years. So for this parametrism also, or any concept, I believe the change will come as fast as possible compared to the previous times.
Yes, there is an acceleration. So if I looked at this closely, so let's say you have periods like the Gothic, several hundred years, the Romanesque as well. And then the Renaissance is still running for at least, I would say, 250, 300 years. And the Baroque, 150, 200 years. And the Neoclassicism, about 150 years. Historicism. And then came modernism, had a run of about, well, you can start 1910 or something, of only like 60 years. So these big epochal styles, they're getting shorter and shorter. Things get faster and faster. I agree with it to some extent. And then you have these kind of very transitional styles, very short, between the historicism and modernism. You had some searching. You had expressionism and Art Nouveau, very short periods. Or between modernism and parametricism, you had kind of postmodernism, 10 years, 15 years. Deconstructism was very short-lived. 10 years, because the sacred protagonist changed into parametricism. So you have these kind of transition period, and then you have, so yes, I don't know what the next stage will be. Parametricism also has internal advances. So what I call now tectonism, the latest stage of parametricism. Similar in modernism, we started with this white modernism in the 20s, then the 40s, they started with brutalism, which came full on in the 60s and 70s, and high tech emerged in the 70s. This kind of industrial design, high tech, Foster Rogers. So this is all modernism. And similarly in Parametricism, we had already several subsidiary phases, and the latest one, tectonism. So this will evolve further. Yes, it changes, moving faster. I mean, not so much on the frontier, super fast. I mean, I'm aligning these big historical styles to socioeconomic eras. So, for instance, the Renaissance, of course, the medieval period was feudalism. That delivered the Romanist, the Gothic. Architecture was only confined to churches or palaces. The rest was just vernacular. There was what I call a traditional on building. The Renaissance, that's the first time we had actually innovation, conscious, completely designed architecture proper. So this was started in northern Italy. This was early capitalist city-states. So it's so the style is reflecting a different socioeconomic political era. And the next style, Baroque, also it's no longer the Baroque is not Italian city-states. It's larger entities. It's the Vatican ruling over half of Europe, meaning big structures that brings on the Baroque. Big, huge structures with heights and depths, colossal order, deep relief, seen from the difference, or Versailles, Louis XIV, integrated national economy like France. There's a strong, powerful monarch, absolutism, and a form of capitalism, mercantilism, that brings on these Baroque style for something like Versailles, where you have to integrate a huge complex into one composition. The Renaissance was not capable of doing that. And then this spread around Europe, that many of the smaller states in Germany imitated absolutism and similar system, and they also brought Baroque architecture. And the next stage was the Bourgeois Revolution, so the French Revolution, and you had the English Revolution, actually the Glorious Revolution at the end of the 17th century, then end of 18th century you had French Revolution, and you had a different system. What evolved was laissez-faire capitalism, not this kind of dirigiste, monarchic privileges, planned economy, absolutist, but yet free capitalism, the bourgeoisie in charge, not the aristocracy. And that's where you had historicism or neoclassicism. They put many different styles and many different building types. So suddenly you have railways as well, you had universities, you had museums, parliament buildings and ministry buildings, not only churches and palaces. And the style was more diverse. You had, all these retro styles, neo-Gothic, neo-Renaissance, neo-Baroque. To express the diversity, that was, I call, historicism. And the next style, modernism, was based again on some kind of revolution, on the technological revolution and the socialist revolutions or social revolutions. This was after First World War. So this world changed. You shifted from this idea of a laissez-faire capitalism to what I call Fordism and a much more highly concentrated capitalism. So in that period, during the 19th century, you had many small companies and many small cities competing, etc., etc. Let's say you had 5,000 steel companies in England. At the end of the century, there were 5, and then there were 3. And you can have concentrated power. You had these revolutions in Russia, in Germany. We had, social democrats ruling in Austria. England didn't have a revolution, but they also changed. So that era brings modernism. Modernism has something to do with, fits quite well with socialism, or let's say social democracy. Fordism, big factories, everybody the same, mass production for the masses becoming clients. There's totally different atmosphere and different conception of architecture where they designed mass housing, which again, in the 19th century was not an architectural topic. But suddenly the topics were mass housing, also factories itself. Formerly, an architect wouldn't have looked at the factory. Actually, architecture was more of an elegant, and the city had no factories. Let's say it was, somewhere else. So in modernism, again, so we have to look at the socioeconomic eras, and that's why I also say modernism run into trouble. At the end of the 70s or in the 70s, this whole idea of, this quasi-socialist in for this assembly line thing and the welfare state and nationalized economies run into huge crisis. And also the socialist countries, they all collapsed because this system could no longer cope with the microelectronic revolution, which opened up innovation, reprogramming the robots, a different type of automation, where you don't locked in an assembly line, where you can do much more innovations. We can now, everybody can work on new innovations, for instance, software as a service or new app. The technological systems can absorb endless innovations. Before, when you had assembly lines, you couldn't invite a new design. No, we can't. These are all fixed, rigid machine processes. You can only produce the same thing for 20 years. But now you can reprogram robots, small series. Everything is new and fresh and different, and variation and recombination and diversity of market, long tails, not just 5, 6. And therefore you cannot plan this kind of economy, in particular with all this kind of the knowledge economy thing. So for that, we had to, we went back to much more market orientation, neoliberalism, so-called post-Fordism. India transformed into a free market. Israel, which was socialist, transformed into like England, Margaret Thatcher, they were the revolution. China, even before the Russia broke down, they had Deng Xiaoping, and this whole kind of socialist sense, was stopped, and they went into capitalism. And that means a totally different dynamic, and not these kind of greenfield factories and satellite cities, sleeping cities. No, it was the urban renaissance. People want to move back in the city. So in the 20th century, London was shrinking. So all this kind of suburban thing, factories out, production plants out, everything out, and villages out, and so on. And then the inner cities were kind of dumps and slums. A phenomenon which happened. And recently, it's the same in the US. There's a kind of reconvergence. Why? Because you're not kind of sitting 9 to 5 and going to a kind of factory or bureaucracy. You have to innovate. You have to kind of connect up with the different collaborating teams, close to the university. You need marketing, you need research development, you need finance. So you get all of that in the city. And that's why architecture is not thinking about something on the green field, but layering something complex and dense in the inner cities. That was the topic already of postmodernism, going back to the Stoic city and the Stoic motifs, deconstructivism, layering into the urban fabric, and Parametricism maintains that topic. And so we have a new historical era with new demands and new tools. So that's very important to realize. And that's the discourse I'm pushing. And a lot of architects are kind of not aware, and I like this. I somehow think this is elegant. I'm doing this. Clients also don't realize that this might be deficient. You could help. And you get this kind of strange thing. So this coming together in the city without a hegemonic style, without proper concepts, led to this kind of thing which nobody likes. I call it garbage through urbanization, where no city built in the last 50 years has any identity, any district. It's all a jumble of different disparate things coming together, different styles, different materials. There's too much choices. There's no order, no ethos of affiliating and connecting. That becomes also kind of menacing and visual chaos. It's better that it's kind of sterile suburbs, but it's also not the right thing. And so that's what I'm thinking about. If the discipline had converged upon parametricism, tectonism, like it converged in the 50s around modernism, we could develop coherently on a city scale. And that is not happening. But as I say, I see the hegemony or the convergence possibly coming in the next years. That's I would find rewarding. But again, so we need to look at things historically and see styles and paradigms and values of architecture connect up to these socioeconomic dynamics.
Does your theory of now, how you mentioned that now today's cities in the last 50 years, it's having all different kind of mixed personalities in the same city, and no such city is having any particular identity or whatsoever. And you have said about this thing in an exhibition or an event about privatization of social spaces as well. Does that also somehow match to this theory of yours?
Yes, because that's another aspect. So the problem is why also disorder in the city is partly to do with the fact that government is too controlling over land use. So they have their land use patterns where they say this is retail, this is residential, this is office, this potentially mixed use. And but so that when the city is trying to evolve and you come into the city with an idea of an enterprise, you cannot freely locate yourself because the government say all these buildings are protected, or here is only this function, here is that function, you can't fuse this, convert functions. And that is a problem, so that things cannot assemble in what I call synergy clusters. So the co-location synergies, which still comes through somehow, are highly not very well placed. And then meaning that these, from a functional perspective, all the buildings, new buildings, are somehow in a kind of suboptimal or wrong place. Their neighboring buildings are not what they would want to be, and they also cannot be substituted to build these networks. And if they were building, and that's privatization in a sense, or let's say getting the government out of the way of over-regulating and planning land use. Also, the way they restrict, once they have set residential as possible, they prescribe, oh, you have to have these large family units because it's ideological. They don't want, whereas the actual market wants single studios, for instance. And these people who want to live at the center, they're living as singles at this point, or just couples, young couples. They want to connect up close to university, close to the company. And that would be, so that doesn't happen. Then they have to commute and they can't find a place close by. So there's so much interference into a natural self-organizing process, that's what I object to. But also, if that was allowed, then architect could work with this better. I mean, the current ilk of architects can't, because they say, oh, I like minimalism. Then somebody else comes, I'm a neo-postmodernist, I'm going to do this. I'm a kind of neo-historicist. And then it ends up with this kind of jumble. We could these people come here because they like to connect with various parts in the surroundings. So let's build something which affiliates with these, starts to look similar, make gesture or opens up to these things, and maybe literally make shared spaces, etc. So you can weave some kind of network which would generate an identity, would be functionally better located, but also would be, if they all sing from the same set of principles, with an ethos of affiliation and the ethos of recognizing also sun directions of influencing the facade, when they're all influenced similarly, you will get something more harmonious. And we've tried that in some, again, I can only use student studios. We have 12 students, 12 different architects together working on a district, for instance, a cultural district, and they work independently but watch each other and connect with each other and generate something which looks more organic and it doesn't look like garbage. So that's what I see. So yes, in this sense it connects, because the underlying, let's say, programmatic order can only come through freedom of choice, can only be self-organized. The bureaucrats, the planners can't manufacture this. They don't know, they don't have a clue, they don't have the knowledge or incentive. They just have some kind of, well, we have this land use plan, you can't change it. Any change is very difficult. And also you have too many you have too many stakeholders. They're trying to be democratic. Oh, all the neighbors have to now agree to this. And it means usually it's prevented, or make it smaller, or do it, but don't do this. So this kind of over-democratization, which I think is a fallacy, where you basically it undermines property rights, it undermines the entrepreneurial choice of maximizing the utility. of a site which only the entrepreneur has the energy, time, and incentive to figure out is undermined by people who don't care much. But since you asked me, I say no. It's like, or they local voting. Does anybody really know their local councillors? Not really. The number of people voting is very small. Some are interested, and they're voting for councillors who usually campaign on October against any new development in your area. So you get this kind of paralysis. That's what I've been arguing against. And also in terms of public spaces, I feel, that the government, local government, whatever, managing, in their borough, I don't know, 2,000 private public spaces. Of course, they can't do that, and they just have some kind of blanket one-fit-all rule. They have some demagogy or whatever, and they're all sterile and underutilized. So they should all be privatized. So you have 2,000 competing entrepreneurs, local, more widespread, coming with kind of well-prepared ideas, bidding for these, activating these. Local shops might be involved. That would be really flourish the exterior spaces, which are now kind of leftover zones. So that's why I believe in privatization, because I just see how India made this, whatever development. And I think that direction you have now, you an entrepreneur, your father an entrepreneur, is due to the fact that socialism was kind of left behind. And it's the same with China. So, but socialism comes in all degrees of shades, or let's say statist, overregulation, over-planning, public ownership of properties. None of that, I believe. It's all ideological. It's all, mistaken, and people just worry and have, I think, false fears that horrible exploitative capitalists, money grabbers would destroy their places and cities.
I do agree with your concept of garbage urbanism, and I feel talking particularly about Mumbai, where I live, that we have seen this, but now in some way it's not happening at a huge scale, but there is a change, which I'll tell you. Earlier, it was like even if a land plot of like 300 square meters or maybe 1,000 square meters was there, the developer was allowed to only redevelop that piece of land since the availability of land in Bombay is very less. Now, what the government has came out with a scheme which is called a cluster scheme, in which it allows the developer to combine all the plots in the adjoining areas within a certain area boundary, and he is then allowed to relocate the FSI of other projects into that new plot and build everything together. So that has a minimum criteria of 6,000 square meters. So in a way, I feel that is a small step towards building something in.
What we see also, there's, at the moment, it's similar to China, you have so much demand for basic, nice flats, relatively new, that you generate these kind of blocks of towers on the outskirts. It's not a nice urbanism. Then you have to commute and so on. But I understand where it's coming from. You have all these countryside villages. I've been flying over India 20 years ago. It's kind of a lace villages. Yes. Not a single big line, no highway. So you still have this kind of moving from the villages into the cities. And that's why you build these things. And you some of these historic centers, they're politically frozen up. So you have to go outside. Similar than Cairo, for instance. The center is beautiful on the Nile and so on, and you could develop it, but they can't because rent controls, housing, everybody's locked in, subsidized groups, whatever. And so they're building New Cairo. And of course, that's difficult to regenerate something which has grown otherwise for hundreds of years. So there's a kind of limitation. I see the rapidity of this development and the political difficulty of going in, developing the center more and have more urbanity developed. So they have, but in general, and I think there's an indirect effect that, let's say, these kind of capitalist development on the outskirts are suboptimal, and has to do also with the fact that the historic centers are politically frozen up. They should be allowed to be more redeveloped and more degrees of freedom. You get better city life out of it. And anyway, I think this has to go through cycles because you will probably, there's this kind of process where you would have to replace your urban fabric every 15 years or something as your population matures, standards of living rise, people need more space, they have different expectations, they don't want to live so far out, they're discovering urban amenities. So in a way, what you're building now is a transitional build, which you shouldn't expect to last. You just can't. And it's similar to, that's what Europe went through. A lot of the stuff which was built in the 60s and 70s as, it's kind of ready for demolition because people's expectations and quality of life have moved on. So that is, one has to look this as a traditional. But anyway, markets need to be given way more scope. This would also solve this kind of crazy housing crisis of the crazy prices, crazy land use prices, crazy real estate prices, because it's just not enough supply and the wrong supply. And that's becoming a huge barrier to the development of talent, of business life, of knowledge economy life, because if people cannot afford to come into the city to participate, then they will waste time in commuting, or they make compromises and stay in the wrong cities just because it's cheaper, and they can't develop their career, or their company isn't developing properly. That in the end is huge cost, and also it's just on a individual level. These crazy house inflation makes people, maybe the nominal incomes looks bigger than their parents' income, even if it's inflation, let's say, controlled. But because of the real estate and housing is so astronomically more expensive, they're way poorer. You can see it in their living conditions. Young professional has to go to some kind of stupid former social housing flat share where the shower isn't working, where the kitchen is dirty, and where you live with people you don't like, and it's a kind of war over toilet paper, and so this is inadequate. This is crazy, but this is this political system, because you could allow entrepreneurs. I know some actually in here. It's 20 entrepreneurs in their 20s doing co-living projects, which the planners just don't want. Co-living where you get your own individual unit. Maybe it's only 12 square meter or 10 square meter or 16 square meter, but then you can have a shared kitchen and even a free co-working space and social spaces, and it's like much more nicer life. So the poverty and the harsh conditions, basically, this kind of is purely politically imposed, because there was no more. You could allow this product to flourish with freeing up the housing market. The government doesn't allow for these because it says, oh, these are too small. They're not dignified. You say that, but the actual, what these people's real choice alternative is something way less dignified than these kind of flat shares. And so it's a very kind of half-baked and inconclusive arguments. And because they don't have real arguments, that's why they become vicious when you criticize, for instance, social housing. Because that's part of it, because the social housing, in a way, kind of subsidizing more affluent groups with partial purchase, subsidized purchase, etc. Or they subsidize people who are economically inactive, but people who are paying for these subsidies themselves get nothing, which is basically professionals between the age of 30 and 40 who working their asses off, have to live in these flat shares and paying taxes to subsidize the other groups, let's say. And I was criticizing this, but you can't do that because it's a bit of a taboo topic. But I'm very convinced that you can allow the market to deliver and solve this problem, which is really a problem which makes everybody poorer. Because what do you do with your income if you can't use it properly for what you want to use it for, namely your nice accommodation. It's not available. It's not made available.
Definitely agreeing to what you said right now, but yeah, so
It's like under socialism when you got an income, but what's the point? Because the shelves are empty.
definitely. Leave it. Cha.
What are you doing here? They're gonna tear up your money because you can't. You're queuing up for 3 hours. And that's cost too.
Yes.
You work, 8 hours, then you queue up for 2 hours, and that's not what you wanted. So tear up your money. Similar here, you make an income, but how many, well, you can fill your wardrobe with shoes or something like this. But what you really wanted to buy is this kind of nicer place, but it's not available because they don't allow you to build it. They don't the entrepreneurs to provide.
Wanting to move a little bit towards the technology, look at toward technology and architecture today, and Zaha Hadid architects have been at the forefront in implementing new technologies such as AI, 3D printing, AR, VR. I want you to tell me how, in today's decade, Zaha Hadid Architects is implementing these new technologies and what kind of technologies.
Yeah, well, you see, I mean, we have this kind of robotic labs here where we do large scale 3D printing, prototyping, very prototype furniture, large models, etc. It's not as easy as it looks like. You're trying to uploading this G code and gearing up the robot. 3D printing we're doing for a long time just to test models weekly. AI is fascinating. So we have a research team of about 4 or 5 people who are nearly full time working on seeing out what's out there on tools, building our own tools, training up the networks, integrating with some other modeling software, etc., and keeping us up to speed and rolling it out. And we're trying it out in most projects when we kick off. We use kind of not on our own ideas and sketches, but let's see what the systems have for us. What can be, varies all the different type of systems, and then we get more strategic and train up networks specifically for each project. We train up special networks and then run them in conjunction with the big network. And now is what's starting to happen. We have to look into this, that you can now already a lot of times generate 3D meshes out of it. So it's not only images, but usually the images are so coherent and quite good that you can quickly model the idea, and you don't need to rely on. You can translate image into model by yourself, but there are no tools as well. And we're training up specifically as a research project. AI has yet to learn this latest stage of parametricism, tectonism, because that's has much more degrees of sophistication in terms of rationality requirements. So is the structural network structurally coherent, and the AI would miss out members and flag things which are evidently not fully rational. Similarly with bridges, where you can see where they don't get it right. But also, AI gets right, perspective, light and shadow, and things look like buildings and even look like parametric goodies, which is pretty amazing that this is possible. But in terms of tectonism, there isn't enough out there to learn from. So we generate networks, tectonism, AIs, and I think it's a huge productivity boost and creativity boost. And so I think it's not only in architecture, it's every business around the world is currently looking towards integrating various AI systems. I mean, the whole software development world, of course, and also all the copywriting and I guess journalism and every writing kind of and academic kind of research. So it's monumental, and of course we have to be very positive and engaged, and it's competitive. So but I don't see anybody else doing quite as much as we. So we are I think we're at the cutting edge here. So
Earlier talked about how you recently have progressed a lot in Metaverse as well.
Yeah.
You can tell about that.
Yeah, so I think the Metaverse is going to be huge. It will be coming. It's only the question when. I mean, we developed a product called Metatopia, which is a Metaverse for the design ecosystem, community of architects, designers of all disciplines, magazines, biennales, etc., connected galleries and so on. So we have quite a few architects displaying their works. We have NFTism gallery, we have fashion shows, and lots of events and panel discussions. It works very well. We have our own interior architecture gallery with many of our products and interiors displayed. You can move in and roam around, meet people, show people around. As I said, we have an auditorium where we make presentations. And this is in one building at the moment. We have a few other buildings. And eventually this will be a city, and it's like a design district. So I believe that when the metaverse is happening, I think eventually everybody will come in, because it's when the network effects kick in, where more and more people are in there showing and meeting, and then you also want to kind of show yourself there, not only visit, but have your own space. So I would predict that it works so well. It's quite compelling compared to a website. On the one hand, you compare it to a website, so everybody who has a website will have virtual spaces, but also everybody who has a venue, a physical venue, and COVID was a big kind of accelerator that would have some of the events, particular galleries, exhibitions, all of our exhibitions we put out virtually. They will have also, everybody who has a building will be in there. And of course, most organizations have websites and buildings, so they will have virtual presence, and they will cluster, I believe, in metaverse cities. Why? Because they want to be next to each other, with a full building, not only one space within a building, not all these buildings next to each other. You can see it. It doesn't work very well in Decentraland because it's such a crap technology, but it can work. We know the technology is going to be there. We can just put everybody into the city, and there's some new technology coming in, so this could really be working. That you can roam around, and then you can meet and real-time communicate. You can collaborate. I'm just doing a studio at the AA, the Metaverse Universities, virtually Bauhaus, how you can collaborate, with these 3D models as design studios, fashion design, industrial design, architecture design. And that's what we focus on, is not utopia, but I think it will affect everybody. And they will cluster in these kind of synergy clusters. I think it's going to be huge. It's because it's compelling. You don't have to fly necessarily. You can have some of these events. It's better than a Zoom event, better than a website show, better than a Zoom event where you just have this grid of people or names, and then there's no after chit chat or networking before, after, and in between. No on the side talking over this chat. We had conferences in the metaverse. They were very well. You meet people, and you can pull aside and talk one-to-one, and you can roam into different, like you have stands in the conference, different stands, not only the main event where you can go and listen, but then you could pull out. There's a sub-stand, there's somebody explaining to you there runs a video and a model, and you can talk to this person, the small group, they come together. You see something, you watch and you see, hey, what's going on there? Let me pull over there. You jump in, you listen. It's much more lifelike, like a real conference, which is of course better than just sitting at home and watching kind of a YouTube, or even participating in a Zoom call. So compelling that this will happen. It is 1,000% certain. And when this will come, it's going to be an avalanche of work for architects, designers. And at that point, it can only be done with the help of AI to generate. Because the amount, suddenly you have to build places for all firms in the world and all schools and NGOs and everybody. They want to jump in this within, they all have the idea. At least this year or next year we're going to come in. We have to come in. Then the amount of work will be kind of astronomical. So I can only recommend anybody to go into this business. But the problem is we don't know when. It will accumulate, and we can do it for the world of designers and architects when we had more and more in there. And if people see, hey, guys, we have all these guys there. Okay, let me come in. I also want to come. Once this has kind of reached the threshold of a critical mass, it's just going to be an avalanche. So I'm very, very optimistic.
It all sounds very exciting and
Oh, great. It really works. I mean, come on. It's just makes life better and more productive, and you can properly show your stuff. It's better to show if it's an object you can swim around or go in a model you can jump into or sketch on than just sharing an Instagram image.
I want to move to the end of the session where you had a very long and a successful career. And what motivated you to be resilient and patient for a longer career?
Well, I mean, it wasn't that I was reasonably successful with respect to what I wanted at the various stages. So even I had no anything built, it was just fun to be a young architect and have these competitions published on and having shows opening, or teaching at illustrious places and so on. So that was good enough for me in the 90s. And at the end of the 90s, I got kind of a bit nervous. Let's stop losing these competitions, please. And what can we do? So we kind of scaled back and concentrated on each one, making more an effort, making them more and slightly more realistic, toning down a bit, but spending much more on making them tangible, making this really more much more precise, rendering it better. So we actually manufactured the win, which was interesting. So then this new stage happened where I was excited about winning and building. So I didn't have really periods where I had to motivate myself with the kind of belief in the future. No, it was happening kind of gradually with the various inspirations I needed. I mean, Zaha was a bit tougher. I mean, she was taking it to heart when she lost all these big projects. She was getting really kind of very frustrated and down and so on and so forth. She wasn't sure, is it going to happen or so. I mean, it was a slight different, balance. I mean, we were kind of involved them as partners, but I was younger and also not, so it wasn't really my firm at that stage. So I wasn't kind of fully wedded to, look, it has to be this vehicle. So if that would have been go bust, I could have refound it or gone elsewhere or whatever. So I was never I didn't need this kind of resilience to kind of stick through. No, it was obvious. It was a good ride all the way through. So,
What were the major reasons that would lead to losing the project?
well, I mean, God, projects have so many factors which have to line up. Market conditions, politicals, planning constraints, other political like we lost the first project simply the client disintegrated. Second big project we lost, this was kind of relying on public funding and I needed lottery funding for cultural building, and that was a political battle where it was also connected with party politics. So I think there was, and maybe some people didn't like the work and I wasn't sure. I mean, it remains a mystery, the different theories about why this didn't happen, but in the end it just wasn't approved. The funding wasn't approved. So projects had these kind of things. I mean, we have a project here in London, which is now we designed it 5 years ago, planning took way too long. And then then the market conditions shift. Suddenly you have COVID. We got planning, but it's too late. They don't want to do it anymore anyway. Planning took 3.5, 4 years. By the time this planning came around, well, there's no longer relevant. Market conditions change, political conditions change. There's too many things. Then they sold it on to another. Then you read value engineering. In the meantime, we were relying on some land swap where somebody else, TfL, Transport for London, had to, swap some land and had to pay some money towards this. They don't have money. So that's the problem with complex projects. There's so many, in London in particular, and in the more mature economies. They're so tightly calculated. There's so many voices which have to be satisfied. That they're very vulnerable that one of these 10 factors or 20 factors might no longer, line up. So most projects don't happen. The spec is this. That's also a problem why this country is not growing. I mean, we have zero growth here, or 0.5% growth is something absurd. With all these kind of new technologies, the economy isn't growing. because there's so much prevention, so much difficulty, so much red tape, so much COVID. Yeah, but it wasn't cool. It was lockdown. Politicians, I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, early on they were saying herd immunity. We'll get through that. In the end, it was like this. Why is COVID gone? Because we all had it. So enemy lockdown killed, every project. In the meantime, now they have another. They've killed the project. There was one fire at one tower here in London, which they said, okay, first of all, now we have to reclad all the towers in the rest of the UK, which is hugely expensive. But secondly, we have new regulations for cladding and for staircases for all towers, but we don't tell you exactly the regulations. We know we have the regulations. Some of you will have about a second staircase. And so basically everything stopped because they're announcing new policy. They don't finish the policy. Nobody knows what's going on. So we're all waiting. So basically planning paralysis, total stoppage of development. And that's the way things work here. It's just dysfunctional right now. And it's also exaggerated. I mean, one fire, fair enough, there's some sad, and it was also some botch up with the fire brigades, whatever it was. But it doesn't mean that it's a total overreaction, mind you.
Moving on to finally, what's one architectural project that you had dreamt of working on it but hadn't had the chance yet?
Google campus.
Okay. So, as we are wrapping up, any message or any advice you would like to give to anyone who is interested at the intersection of architecture, future, technology?
Very careful which school of architecture to choose, because most of them are down the drain, let's say, or who will say it's a kind of woke self-annihilation of the discipline. How let's say the woke self-destruction of architectural education, let's say. So that's hard to find places. I mean, there are pockets in most places, but you have to really find them and make sure that you get in and that you invest in the skills. Invest in the skills and learn and read. But I would say with a strategic eye on your own success, because that will also be the success for society. If you want to do something good for society, you can only do that if you're successful. If you fail, what have you done? So you need to resist this counter culture and of approach as a student, which is just to disempower you. And that, I'm not sure, I heard it's many other disciplines, let's say. In architecture, it is pervasive, unfortunately. I think there will be probably a kind of turnaround soon because it's gone too extreme.
So,
Are we done?
yeah, that's it. Just also thank you, and I feel very grateful that I got this opportunity to do this with you. And all things said from the start, your journey to the things that you mentioned about kind of got me some more learning about architecture and in this industry. So thanks once again for being a part of this.